Welcome to Anews. I'm amidst, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. As Israel tightens its grip on Gaza with man-made starvation and a blockade on nearly 2 million people, Turkey and Egypt are ramping up ceasefire efforts. Today, I'll be breaking down Israel's deadly aid strategy, Ben-Gvir's incursion into Al-Aqsa, and why peace talks in Doha remain paralyzed.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held a phone call with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Monday. The two leaders discussed bilateral relations, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and regional developments. Erdogan congratulated Starmer for his recent remarks supporting the recognition of the State of Palestine. The Turkish leader said the situation in Gaza has reached a critical level, describing the humanitarian catastrophe as a challenge to the conscience of humanity. He emphasized that it is no longer enough to express concern, calling for concrete steps to push Israel toward a ceasefire and a two-state solution. Erdogan also underlined Turkey's ongoing efforts to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, its support for mediators, and its backing for ceasefire negotiations. The British Premier reiterated his government's long-standing position that a viable and sovereign Palestinian state alongside a secure Israel is the only path to lasting peace. The leaders also reviewed progress on a potential export deal for UK-built Typhoon fighter jets to Turkey, following last month's Memorandum of Understanding signed in Istanbul by the country's defense ministers. Both sides expressed hope for deeper defense cooperation and pledged to continue dialogue in the coming period.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us today, not on the studio, but online, is Dr. Mehmet Çelik, Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator. Dr. Mehmet, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Omar.
Dr. Mehmet, let's start with Turkey's humanitarian aid supply that it is sending to the occupied Gaza Strip through Kızılay, and also how Turkish foreign minister and his Egyptian counterpart, they held talks over the weekend discussing about Gaza and the new efforts that the Turkish government is going to take in collaboration with its partners in the Middle East.
Well, first of all, the talk between Mr. Fidan and his Egyptian counterpart is, I think it's a significant call because it shows that there's still diplomatic efforts, not only for the wider regional cooperation and bilateral ties, but also specifically on the Gaza issue. As Turkey has close ties and open channels with Hamas, and of course Egypt has the Rafah crossing border. For that sense, the delivery of aid from Turkey to Gaza has to be coordinated, of course, with the Egyptian counterparts. In that sense, when that cooperation channel and communication is open, it becomes more effective to deliver aid and to increase aid efforts. I think at this point, when Egypt is one of the sides that has been active in negotiations between Hamas and the Israeli side, it is important to have Turkey on the same page, and as well as having this communication channel open so that the efforts can be increased and how they can be more effective when it comes to aid delivery. For that reason, I think this is a significant call, and it still shows that regional initiatives are still there to push forward or push for that ceasefire or push for that, I think, making the aid delivery more effective. As of now, that Rafah border is open, obviously, but very limited access is given to aid delivery. So there's still lots of restrictions that needs to be eliminated for the aid, for the humanitarian aid to be actually, serving the purpose for the wider region and the more people in Gaza. As of now, that aid delivery is just tip of the iceberg. It is serving to. Otherwise, without opening Rafah crossing, without opening aid corridors, I'm afraid this hunger and the starvation situation will get more tense. Some aid trucks were delivered through the crossings, and they also delivered some energy resources. Some 107 tankers, I believe, were they delivered some oil to the other side. But given the destruction of infrastructure, given the mass hunger that's going on, given the cutoff of supplies at many different levels, be it medical supplies or otherwise, that limited and restricted aid crossing is not sufficient at the moment to address the situation and the catastrophe in Gaza. So for that reason, I mean, Turkey has been is using diplomacy as an instrument, put pressure on the international community to coordinate it with regional partners so that aid can be delivered through the Rafah crossing and for it to reach people in Gaza.
Mehmet, what's your analysis about the recent incursion that was conducted by Ben-Gvir, who is the Israeli National Defense Minister? What do you think about that? How provocative are such moves at a time when over 60,000 Palestinians have been killed in the occupied Gaza Strip and the entire international community is asking the Israelis to stop?
Well, first of all, I think aside from all that is since October 7, aside from the fact that there is an occupation in Palestinian territories, this holy place is holy to more than one religion. So it has this, this as a sanctuary. It has a symbolic meaning for more than just one religion. So it has to be respected by all religions. Any provocation towards the other side, I think, leads to the word provocation can be used at the very least. But more than that, I think it stirs more tensions. It can make it, the already ongoing genocide and the tensions in Gaza and West Bank. It could spread to the wider region because the Al-Aqsa compound, Al-Aqsa mosque compound, has more meaning, to the wider Muslim region and Muslim population. So the events that took place over the weekend there, I think, to say the very least, they are provocations. They are to incite and to ignite more tensions in the region. It is to also at the same time devoid and ignore the fact that it has symbolic and religious meanings to other faiths. So saying that going and conducting some rituals by nearly 1,200 people, and escorted by the police, and making insults to the Palestinian residents there in the region and journalists, etc. I think this is not just respectfully conducting some religious rituals by even violating that sensitivity over Al-Aqsa compound, but it is a provocation, as you said, to say the very least, by doing some dances, by doing some assaults on people in the area, and literally raiding the compound by over 1,200 people. This is, I think, putting fuel on already a very strong fire that has been going on in the occupied territories. So for that reason, I mean, ultranationalists have done it previously too, these provocations, but this has been one of the strongest ones, the largest ones, by hundreds of people that have made this provocation, have made this occupation, have made this aggression, and made a very ultra-nationalist tendency normalized in the occupied territories. I think for that reason, it is a dangerous moment. It is a move that can easily escalate tensions beyond the occupied territories because the Al-Aqsa compound has a very strong meaning for the wider Muslim community.
Mehmet, now pressure has been increasing on the Israelis Donald Trump has also said that Israel must avoid starvation. The Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff was also in the occupied Gaza Strip, and then he visited the families of the hostages in Tel Aviv. How are you looking at the latest developments, Mehmet, considering what's been going on and how President Trump is reacting to the ongoing situation?
Well, President Trump's reaction, or for that reason, any other leader's reaction coming from the western part of the world, Israel's allies, Israel's traditional allies, be it in the European continent or North America, if they're not translating into some concrete actions, just mere condemnation doesn't mean anything when there's hundreds of people starving at the moment, when there's people actually dying from starvation. Unless that stops by taking concrete action or applying concrete pressure on Israel to stop this policy of starvation, policy of hunger, policy of using famine as a weapon against the civilians in the occupied territories, this doesn't really mean anything. Although the international community's pressure is important, I'm not belittling it. I'm not saying the international pressure, international public opinion doesn't mean anything unless the occupier stops their aggression. But at the same time, that hunger, that starvation is continuing without any signs from Tel Aviv or from Israel showing that it will actually stop or change the situation on the ground. Right now, they have used this 10-hour tactical pause, or they have opened very little access through for the aid to be delivered. Previously, they have used that Gaza humanitarian fund as a method to deliver aid, but none of these are actually effective. None of these are actually serving the actual, as a solution to the actual problem of a genocide taking place, of a starvation being used as a weapon. Now, maybe these are symbolically serving the tip, that's very small fraction of people, but not only is this not enough, not only is this not effective, at the same time, Israel is attacking people that are going to get this humanitarian aid. Israel is attacking people when they're going to pick some food for their family. Israel is using this method in a way to easily target people. So there is more than one problem that comes with the so-called solution and the so-called humanitarian aid that Israel is providing, or at least providing access to it, when the problem is much bigger, when the problem needs to start with a ceasefire and an opening all the border crossing for the mass humanitarian aid to be delivered. Witkoff's visit, I think, this is not his first time visit, but the fact that he visited the other side as well, it's symbolic in that sense. But what can this do if it is not stopping the ongoing genocide, if it is not applying pressure on Netanyahu's cabinet so that this mass starvation is coming to an end? The U.S. policy, or be it some of the traditional allies or the allies of Israel in Europe, they keep talking about this starvation. They keep talking about the mothers and babies, being killed. They talk about children starving to death and saying this is not acceptable. But at the same time, they provide their support politically or economically or militarily. They put that support behind Israel. So there is a double. There is an oxymoron there, for the lack of a better word, and there is something that doesn't really make sense for as a solution to this major problem in our region. I think if the international community and those who can apply pressure on Israel want to bring this starvation to an end, bring this occupation to an end, or the genocide to an end, they must apply at least political pressure on Netanyahu government. They must stop supplying weapons and armaments to Israel that are being used against civilians in Gaza. Otherwise, it is very hard to make any sense of this remarks or these statements coming from the leadership in Europe or the United States.
Mehmet, France and Saudi Arabia have also vowed to keep up the momentum for a two-state solution. Now, we saw there was a conference in New York last week, and then there was the New York declaration that was released. And, you know, it was a strongly worded declaration where Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar said that Hamas must leave the occupied Gaza Strip, and the control should be handed over to the Palestinian Authority. Tell me about that, Mehmet. How do you view these statements by these Arab countries? Do you think that Hamas is going to agree to these statements?
Well, Hamas, as you know, was elected by the people in Gaza as a and they were actually voted in to come into power. Nevertheless, I think the problem is not who will govern Gaza or who will govern the other places in occupied territories. The problem is that there is an occupation and there is an occupier that does not see anybody as a legitimate force or to govern or as a legitimate group unless it is abiding by the rules set by the Israeli side. If that is the case, then where is the will of people in that region? What will happen to people's rights and people's right to determine for themselves in that region? The problem is not whether Hamas should be leaving or not. The problem is that the occupiers, the Israeli government or Israeli side wants to dictate what will happen to the Palestinian territory and Palestinian people rather than Palestinians themselves deciding for this. I think it only, Hamas is, I think, as a group, maybe seen as a solution if they leave. But the actual violence that has been applied to these people will also bring resistance from the coming generations. This is not a solution if the Hamas is seen as a group that if it was removed, the whole situation will be solved. That's not the case. As long as the occupiers continue their violence, as long as the occupation continues, I think that resistance will be there from the Palestinian side against the occupation. If Israel wants to solve the situation, I think a two-state solution still must be on the table with East Jerusalem as the capital of a free Palestine and with the borders of 1967 deal. So since then, since that is not the agreed position of Israel, it is not easy to understand what kind of two-state solution are these states actually proposing. Or when they say the Gaza administration will be left to Palestinian Authority, I mean, what kind of administrative or jurisdiction they will have over the occupied Gaza Strip with Israel's presence there. If Israel is not going to be leaving the Gaza Strip, what is the point of having an administration there to begin with, be it Hamas or be it a Palestinian Authority? Israel must leave the occupied Gaza Strip. Israel must stop the genocide and stop the killing, and then Palestinians can decide for themselves, be it Palestinian Authority or a new group or somebody else or another entity that will form a group and they will decide for themselves. The problem is that there is no room for the Palestinians to decide for themselves. And of course, it is also a problem that there's different groups within Palestine that have different positions on how that future should look like for the Palestinians as a people.
Day Sabah's editorial coordinator, Dr. Mehmet Çelik, thank you for that analysis. As usual, it was a pleasure listening to your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Israel's war cabinet is reportedly considering seizing the entire Gaza Strip as military operations intensify following the breakdown of ceasefire talks with Hamas.
Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday he will convene his security cabinet this week to decide on Israel's next steps in Gaza. The announcement follows the collapse of indirect ceasefire talks with Hamas. One senior Israeli source suggested more force could be an option. On a visit to Israel, U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff had said he was working with the Israeli government on a plan that would effectively end the war in Gaza. Talks in Doha had aimed to secure a short-term ceasefire that would see an influx of desperately needed aid to more than 2 million civilians, many of whom are gripped with acute malnutrition. Health authorities in Gaza said at least 40 Palestinians were killed by Israeli gunfire and airstrikes on Monday, including 10 seeking aid, adding another 5 had died of starvation. Video obtained by Reuters showed Palestinians running from gunfire near a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid distribution site in central Gaza on Saturday. Israeli officials have floated ideas including expanding their military offensive and annexing parts of the war-shattered enclave. Israel's Channel 12 on Monday, citing an official from the Prime Minister's office, said Netanyahu was inclining towards expanding the offensive and seizing the entire Palestinian enclave. Israeli Army Radio reported on Monday that the country's military chief has become increasingly frustrated with what he describes as a lack of strategic clarity by the political leadership. A spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces declined to comment on the report, but said that the military has plans in store. Hamas has repeatedly said it won't lay down arms, but it has told mediators it was willing to quit governance in Gaza for a nonpartisan ruling body, according to 3 Hamas officials. It insists that the post-war Gaza arrangement must be agreed upon among the Palestinians themselves and not dictated by foreign powers.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Javed, I was talking about Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy for the Middle East. He was in the occupied Gaza Strip and he visited Tel Aviv. I was talking about that with Dr. Mehmet Çelik earlier. Now, how are you looking at this situation, Javed? Because what do you think about Witkoff's visit to the Middle East? Do you think that that could bring about a ceasefire, or do you think we are still going to see the Palestinians suffer more at the hands of the Israelis?
I think it is harder to expect any immediate ceasefire at this particular point of time. As we speak, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has called for a meeting and to instead expand the scale of the military operation inside occupied Gaza territories. I think that is an indicator on 2 grounds we can analyze. One is it may be just a pressure tactic to basically neutralize the surge in pressure from Europe and the Americans to bring an end to this over 2 years long war. Then the second option, I think, which looks like to me is more plausible, which makes more sense, and that is that since Netanyahu himself is a completely indoctrinated, for last 40 years he's been working against the 2-state solution, so he simply doesn't care who says what in Europe, who says what in Washington, because effectively they've been blackmailing all these leaders. These leaders would not go beyond any just political rhetoric, some statements. The maximum concessions they may be able to get is just to give some food to the starving Palestinian population. Beyond that, I don't foresee anything happening, despite the fact that there have been a lot of protests inside apartheid Israel. And remember, this does not mean that it is an indicator of Israeli population turning against their government of what is happening in Gaza. They are least bothered about it. It is an isolated population whose dear ones are in custody of Hamas. They are perturbed. So obviously they are very upset, and they've been putting a lot of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu, on the other hand, has been killing all these captives in the Hamas custody by going for an industrial scale of the genocide in Gaza. It has not left any meaningful infrastructure in Gaza. Obviously, somewhere these captives have to be hidden, and they died. And now just a fraction of these captives, these prisoners of war, have been in custody of Hamas. And again, I think now there is, relatively speaking, there is less leverage left with these protesters to bring back the prisoners of war. But broader picture is obviously the pressure is there. Pressure is not obviously from the leadership of the Europe, from the leadership of Americans. Pressure is from the general public. There have been tens of thousands of people coming on the roads, more particularly on the streets of the Sydney. That is indicator that the public pressure is increasing because they are seeing all these images of starvation which are being live streamed on social media network, on mainstream media, particularly I'm talking about Al Jazeera and some Turkish news network. That is a source of concern for the Israeli government. And that is why that some of the, I think there are as many as 600 former officials of Israel, former security officials of Israel, who are strategic experts. They have written letter to Donald Trump, not to Netanyahu, and they're asking Donald Trump to put pressure on Netanyahu to bring an end to this genocide, not out of their concern that the people are being killed, but out of concern that now there are more and more public resentment all over the world against the Jewish community. I believe all Jews do not simply subscribe to the extremist agenda of the Zionists. Nonetheless, I think in the past they have been under attack, and there is a greater possibility that they would once again come under attack because the optics are, the general perceptions are that the Jews are the extremists, though these are the Zionists. So basically, Zionists are playing havoc with the larger Jewish community living everywhere in the world, and that is a fear among many strategic experts in Israel. That is why they are writing letter to the Trump to put more pressure on Netanyahu. But the bigger trouble is that these political leaders, more particularly Donald Trump, he's been already compromised given the fact that there are his odd videos, sex videos with the Mossad, on the basis of which he's being blackmailed. And that is why this killing machine continues in Gaza.
Javed, we saw videos released by Hamas showing 2 Israeli hostages, and they were in terrible condition, they were starving. And now the Western leaders, they've condemned those videos. They've said that those images coming out of Hamas tunnels are horrifying. But the West did not condemn the same situation which the Palestinians were facing, right? The West was quick to say that, Israel is allowing the Palestinians to live. Israel is, fighting its operations. Israel is trying to bring the hostages back. But that was not the case. The Western leaders, they are saying now that the videos that came out of the videos released by Hamas are horrifying. Now, why did we not see the same reaction when we saw Palestinians dying, when we saw Palestinians, queuing for aid, for humanitarian aid? The West did not react in such a similar way, but we saw how Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and the French President Emmanuel Macron have released statements condemning these videos. So why is there this discrepancy again and again and again?
Because the West has been talking about basically the same talking point which the Netanyahu government has been saying publicly. Because, it doesn't make sense when the Western leaders say that the Israel has right to defend themselves. And I don't understand, does that defense means genocide of unarmed population? It doesn't make sense at all. Essentially, we have to understand that there is no significance in the eyes of the West, in the eyes of the Israeli, about the lives of the Palestinians. They are least bothered about. Now, these kind of the images that these 2 starving Israeli in custody of Hamas have been shown, that is even not the tip of the iceberg of the scale of the starvation in occupied Gaza. These captives, these prisoners of war, are starving because there is no food in Gaza. They are not starving because Hamas is not giving them food. They are starving because Israel has blocked all the routes, all the roads, all the channels of transporting food trucks into Gaza. That is the reason. Now, the interpretation that you have excellently pointed out is being made focusing on these two captives, saying that the Hamas is mistreating them. It does not make sense. Hamas doesn't have the food to feed these captives. That was the message which was misinterpreted in West deliberately, intentionally. They know it what is going on. So what is happening? There are as many as 500 food trucks, which are a daily requirement of Gaza. So how many trucks are being sent? 50 trucks, 60 trucks. UN agencies have been allowed at a very limited scale. Now there is another proposal which Israel's cabinet has approved, which says that some selected merchants would be allowed to import food from outside of Gaza. This means essentially that Israel has managed to basically set up its espionage network inside Gaza by exploiting its starving population. Now, all the monetary transactions would be monitored by Israel. All the movements would be monitored by Israel. What is being taken inside Israel, what is being taken inside Gaza would be monitored by Israel. So these are the essentially indicators that how, once again, with the new method, the people inside Gaza would be exploited. There were two earliest measures which Israel had and Americans had undertaken. Those were these Gaza Holocaust Foundation. That is what I would call it. They have already killed nearly 1,000 people. Thousands others have been injured. They had the death traps. No, that did not work. Since there was a lot of international pressure. Then they used, started dropping, they allowed the limited dropping of food from the air, which also led to the killing of so many people. That was a humiliation of people. That did not work. Now the third method that they have come up with now is using merchants, so-called merchants, which I believe some of them at least must be compromised. They must be working for Israeli intelligence or Mossad. So I think in a broader picture, the exploitation of the Palestinian continues and the West is silent. And they are not coming up with any meaningful statement. Even when they talk about, like UK, Canada, when they talk about conditionally recognizing the state of Palestine, that means they are just simply satisfying their public anger. That means nothing. They could have done a lot. They could have suspended the supplies of the weapons to Israel. That did not happen. They could have suspended the intelligence to Israel. That did not happen. They could have suspended trade with Israel. That did not happen. They could have come up with a very meaningful sanctions. That did not happen because they are not sincere with the Palestinians, because they are Muslims. Even if you are hearing some so-called, at a very limited scale, hue and cry in the West by these leaders, that is also partially because of the fact that the thousands of the Christians have also been expelled from their regions. They are also displaced. Their churches have been bombed and bulldozed by Israel. So that is a little lingering concern. So far as the Muslim population is concerned, dozens of the mosques, I would say rather hundreds of the mosques inside Gaza have been demolished, have been bombed. They have not left any school. They have not left any university. So again, the concern for the West is for the Zionists, because many Christian leaders are also part of Zionist organization and they're pursuing their agenda.
Javed, Egypt is also facing intense criticism for keeping the Rafah border crossing closed. Now, how do you look at the actions taken by the Egyptian government and how it's prosecuting people who are supporting Palestinians?
That is a very ironic, but that is not unexpected. It's not just Egypt, it's Jordan, it's Saudi Arabia. Most of these Arab leaders, they have been compromised. There cannot be criticism. You cannot criticize Israel in these Arab countries. So again, prosecuting people for supporting Palestinian, I think it is a hugely questionable. You know, these people believe that having good links, having good ties with Israel, with the apartheid state, they can survive. This is the only their bid. I don't think that is going to work over a period of time. There is a suppression in Egyptian society. First, they removed President Modi, who was behind it. Saudi Arabia was behind it. Americans were behind it. And behind all this, it was Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, because they didn't want any political leader with Islamic credentials. Now, so far as the Egyptian society is concerned, it's a deeply suppressed. It cannot have a dissenting voice against the President Sisi. And President Sisi is in league with the Israeli administration. They've been coordinating on the Rafah border. They are not allowing anything coming from Egypt inside Gaza. Even they are not allowing the smuggling of food into Gaza.
Javed,
and that is horrible.
These Arab countries are now also asking Hamas to exit Gaza. What do you make of those statements?
It doesn't make sense. Hamas has come up with a clear plan. They are saying that they would not allow any foreign intervention. And what they're saying is, we are ready to quit the government in Gaza, provided there is another government by the Palestinians. Let there be a coalition government inside Gaza. Let all the factions, let all the political parties of Palestinian region take a decision who should govern Gaza, not the Americans, not the Israeli, not the Egyptian, not the Jordanian, and not the Saudi leaders. Again, the problem is that Israel wants the Hamas should make a declaration of a surrender, and its leader should be exiled. Now, who are the Israelis? Who are the Americans to determine the future of the Palestinians? Hamas, again, it is, I think, for the sake of the survival of the population, they did come up with a very genuine proposal, and which meaningfully makes sense that they don't want to govern Gaza. So let the other political parties decide the future of Gaza. Let them be in charge of Gaza. But essentially, for the optics, Netanyahu wants that it wants to see Hamas surrendering its weapons before the Israeli army. This is not going to happen. These people have resisted for last 2 years without any external military support, without any, I would say, hardly on a limited food. They have their tunnels network beneath the surface in Gaza, and that is the source of their survival. And from there they've been operating. From where they've been killing Israeli soldiers. They have been resisting. They've been firing rockets. I think this is something which is extraordinary. That with a very limited weapons, with a very limited number of the manpower that Hamas has, they've been fighting against a regular military force backed by the NATO countries, backed by the Americans with all kinds of weapons, backed by the precise intelligence, by satellite intelligence, by all these Western countries. Nonetheless, they are surviving, and they are willing to lay down their lives, but they would not surrender. That is the resistance force. This is the legitimate right of the Palestinians to resist the Israeli aggression. This is not terrorism. Terrorism is what we are seeing is being conducted by the apartheid Israel. So in a broader context, I think the solution lies with the coalition government inside Gaza, which would comprise all political parties, excluding Hamas. Hamas doesn't want to be part of it. And even if it wants to be part of it, it would not be on a governing seat. But saying that let the Hamas first surrender, only then there will be an end to the war, end to the genocide in Gaza, it does not make sense. Essentially, the reason is Israel wants to occupy entire Gaza. That is their objective. They want to. We know it now. There have been repeated statements from the top officials and the ministers of Israeli government that they don't want to see any Palestinian inside Gaza. That is why they are creating unlivable conditions in Gaza to force population to exit from the occupied territories.
Javed, just very briefly before I let you go, now we've seen over 600 days of Israeli massacres in the occupied Gaza Strip. Over 60,000 people have been killed by Israeli forces. What are the key demands for a ceasefire now? What are the demands that both Hamas and the Israeli government are making at this point? We've been seeing that the ceasefire talks were stalled in Doha. Now, what are these demands? What do both sides want at this point?
I think Israel wants that there would be a ceasefire just for the 60 days. In return of the ceasefire, Hamas would hand back all the dead bodies of the prisoners of the wars. Hamas would also hand back all the captives in its custody. And then there will be resumption of genocide. That is the punchline of the entire negotiations which have been taking place, and partially also that Hamas is not willing to Israel's demand that it wants to retain its military occupations on the territory that Israel has already taken over. More particularly, Israel has been insisting that it wants to keep its soldiers deployed on Rafah borders, which is between Gaza and Egypt. So I think, on the other hand, Hamas feels that it means that there would be lease of life for the Palestinians only for the 60 days. And once they hand over all these captives to Israeli government, that means they would not have any leverage to negotiate with Israel. That means then there will be complete bombing of Israel, of Gaza. Then that means there will be more intensification of genocide campaign, and everybody from the Gaza would be forced to leave. Now there is already genocide is going on, but again the scale would be at more industrial scale. So I think these are the apprehensions on the basis of which Hamas has straight away deserted from the negotiations. It is saying that it is no longer part of the negotiations because it was also giving a kind of a false impression that these negotiations would be successful, and then there would be resumption of the food trucks and they would be allowed inside Gaza. So I think by deserting these negotiations, Hamas has managed to build up some international pressure, as a result of which there is some aid is now trickling down inside Gaza. But we have to understand that now the starvation, people dying with the starvation, that remains the second source of the genocide which is happening right now in Gaza.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you for joining us on today's episode of Turkey's Diplomacy. It was a pleasure listening to your analysis. That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.